Okay, let me ask you a question. Have you ever looked at a clear night sky and there was this one star that just shined brighter than any of the other stars and you wondered why? Well, if you were to take a telescope and zoom in, you would realize that it's actually... Okay, first of all, this devlog was supposed to come a lot sooner than the last one, but unfortunately sometimes life gets in the way. What has changed? Well, a lot actually. You see, over the last 3 devlogs I've added a bunch of new enemies, came up with an interesting gameplay idea, which is still in its early stages, and now there is only one thing that is missing that will finally complete this vision circle that I had in my mind, and that is some kind of a base or a hub. So from the lore standpoint, which by the way the lore is not final, the game has 2 sides, good and evil, and the players are like space soldiers whose mission is to fight against evil forces, or in other words, they are pretty badass, and it only makes sense to me that they need something where they are going to live. And so, in my opinion, the only thing that comes close to their level of badassness is a giant freaking spaceship, and let me just say, I just couldn't wait to finally get to work on this. So first things first, when building something, the most important part is getting the scale right. So I quickly made a base plate just to figure out the correct size of the spaceship, and then with full confidence that I'm about to make the best spaceship that I have ever seen, I opened up Blender, cracked my knuckles and got to work. But of course, what kind of devlog would this be if everything didn't go to shit, right? Because literally like 10 minutes into this and I already didn't like the shape of it, but I just kept going with the hope that in the end it will look decent, right? Well, no, I mean, just look at it. Yeah, well, the base shape was horrible, it lacked detail, and whenever I tried to add something to it, my mind was like... So, plan B. You know the saying, steal like an artist? Yeah, so I googled up some spaceship images for inspiration, which, by the way, definitely wasn't a cry for help, and after seeing all the amazing models and artworks that people have done, I was hyped. So I made a collection of spaceships that I really liked and tried to see what parts do I like the most. And then I tried to draw the spaceship with all the parts that I liked, but I quickly realized that that was a horrible idea because I suck at drawing, so instead I made a prototype of the ship in Roblox, but I also had to be a little more strategic this time because the whole point of the spaceship is for it to be like a hub or a home for the space soldiers. So it needs to have a room for each of them. And I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't super satisfied with the result, but it already looked much better than the first spaceship. I then took the prototype model and tried to recreate it in Blender, which of course wasn't without its obstacles. But I got it to a point where it looked kind of decent and I thought I was finally getting somewhere with it. But then disaster struck. I mean, I literally got a slap in the face because I forgot about one thing. But then I was like, oh well, that's not a problem, I'll just make the interior in Roblox, and plus that way it'll be much easier. Oh, how wrong I was. It was painful. The problem is that Roblox, even with the plugins that I have, just doesn't have the tools that Blender has, and I'm much more used to Blender, and also my modeling skills are lower than the lowest point on the earth. And so when you add these things together, you end up with the biggest abomination that humankind has ever seen or will ever see in the entire lifetime of the universe. Okay, but really, jokes aside, I had to start making the spaceship all over again, which just the thought of starting again for the 3rd time felt exhausting. But this is the result. You can see here we have the body, this is the control room, and this huge box in the back is where each player is going to have their own room. And this time I finally didn't make the mistake with the interior and made the whole interior completely in Blender. So first I made this cool computer panel for the control room, then I made some furniture so that it doesn't look so bland. And actually, I'm gonna stop here because there is something really wrong here. That's an old CRT monitor in a modern futuristic spaceship. Yeah, I know, it doesn't make any sense and I really don't know what went through my head, but I fixed it later. And now that the whole spaceship was done, it was time to import it into Roblox and put final touches on it. But unfortunately I had once again fallen into this seemingly never-ending cycle which I have experienced many times before, and because of that I'm gonna call it the import-export cycle of doom. And it is exactly what it sounds like. I export the model from Blender, then imported it into Roblox, then I realized that I either forgot about something or it was wrongly exported, which means I have to go back to Blender, export again, then go to Roblox, import again. And normally this isn't something that takes long time, but because the model has a lot of parts, importing always takes like 2 minutes, and when you combine this with my slow internet connection and the fact that I have to repeat this cycle over and over again like 8 times, it starts to get a little frustrating. But after like 20 minutes I successfully broke this cycle and fixed all the issues. I finished the spaceship and then I added the remaining parts. Another thing that is kind of necessary, and a lot of games have it, is a main menu. Now, this wasn't a part of my original plan, but since every player is going to have their own room, I figured why not? So I first positioned the camera to the middle of the room so that when a player joins, he will see himself. And anyway, then I made the buttons for the menu, and then I made them pretty. And once that was done, I began working on the doors so that they open properly. Again, this wasn't without its problems, but hey, I think this one actually looks pretty cool. Then I did a little bit of testing to really make sure everything works. The only problem that I found was that when the player hit play, he went into this free roam mode and he could explore the spaceship, but instead I wanted the player to teleport to a game, because that's probably what you expect when you hit play, right? So I transferred that functionality to another button in the bottom right that will let the player freely walk around the spaceship. Also, I didn't like the transition from the menu camera to the third person, mainly because there wasn't any transition, so I added some twinning and now look at that. Perfection. The last thing that I added was a screen to choose how you want to play the game when you hit play. Now this is still a subject to change, but for now I made a solo button if you want to play solo, or team if you want to make a group with friends and play together. And I also made some lovely icons for these buttons and I think they look great, so please hit like if you agree. And apparently this took me such a long time that when I hit play and teleported to a new map, the trees just gave up. But I didn't care because I wasn't in the mood to fix that, so to keep my sanity up I instead went on to do something more creative, like making a new skin for the player, because I just got tired of looking at this mess. So once again I opened up my good friend Blender, and this time I put all of my mind's power to make the best model. And if you are wondering what happens if you use 100% of your brain, this happens. But hold up, I'm not finished, there is still
one more thing today.
Over the last 3 devlogs, except the first one, I've always made a new enemy, and I think now it has become a tradition. And I didn't tell you this, but originally players had hammers. But it was cut pretty early on due to some issues. But I was like, that can be an interesting enemy. And one of those attacks that I originally had in the game was like this jump attack, where the player would jump and hit the ground really hard, and I knew this attack would fit the enemy perfectly. And again, we have to do the usual things, so I first made a prototype, then animations, then I coded this logic, After that I was focused mainly on the jump attack because I knew that that would take me some time to get right, and my first attempts at this were horrible. But after some time I got it working pretty well, and then I made some smoke particles when he hits the ground, and finally a model. And this is the result. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you haven't seen my previous devlog, well, don't worry, I got you. You can just click here. It's full of interesting stuff.